Hello everyone, so I'm going to be continuing to read A Cup of Kindness by Icypanther on AO3. So, yeah, I don't know how many chapters I'll get through, maybe like one or two, but yeah, I hope you enjoy. Also, sorry if I freaking stutter, I know it's annoying, but yeah, I can't help it. Okay, 2 days later, and Keith didn't have a choice. He had to return to the coffee shop. It's not that he hadn't tried other places. This town was big, almost too big, and he figured there had to be another place somewhere that didn't lock their dumpsters. There wasn't. He was sure if he ventured into some of the subdivisions, he might find something in private garbage cans, but he also knew he'd be far more likely to be seen, and there were less places to hide, and homeowners seeing a bedraggled boy who clearly didn't belong in their manicured neighborhoods would surely call the police on the dangerous-looking person. He found a college campus, Garrison City University, and Keith blamed the fact that he was so tired when he arrived in town that he hadn't realized GGU was stationed here. But he'd been scared away by a set of campus police officers patrolling by, and he definitely didn't look like he belonged. And Keith knew he definitely didn't look his best. Appearances had never mattered much to him, but even he could feel that his hair was greasy and starting to hang lank, and there was an odor coming off of him that he tried to remedy, taking a quick, fully clothed dip in a park fountain, of which he'd taken to also drinking out of, and at least that was staving off the thirst. But he wasn't sure it had helped all that much, not to mention the bruise on his face was darkening into an ugly purple now, and it screamed that he'd been in a fight, even if the fight had been one-sided and fighting back only made them hit him more. He'd always been thin and small for his age, and probably not helped by the lack of regular meals, even though he knew the foster agency paid enough for such. But for the first time, he felt sort of thin, sort of stretched, and the constant exhaustion wasn't helping, as he had yet to sleep for more than a couple of hours at a time. It was too dangerous to do otherwise. His stomach had stopped hurting yesterday morning, but Keith knew from experience that wasn't a good sign, even if at least wasn't as bothersome and painful now. He needed to eat, but his hand tightened in the cuffs of his jacket. If the owner had locked the dumpster, then Keith didn't know what he was going to do. Helplessness had taken the place of hunger in his stomach, and Keith hated it. He had long ago learned that adults couldn't be trusted, that the people who were supposed to protect him never did. They said they did. They said they were trying to help him. But he only ever ended up hurt. They were too tired. It didn't excuse them. They had so many other kids to take care of. It didn't mean they couldn't listen when Keith told them that his foster family was abusive. Discipline, they'd said, well within the family's rights, even if it clearly wasn't working. And then off he went to an even worse family, or he shuddered, the group home, which, while it didn't have abusive foster parents, it had other kids with nothing to lose, and didn't care so long as they can make others hurt. And Keith had always been a favorite target. It's why he put up with what he did at the foster homes, why no matter how bad they were, he knew it could be worse. Except this foster home had had a threat none had before, and he couldn't stay, couldn't wait for the agency's visit in 3 weeks, and couldn't even trust them to do something, as he told them a few weeks ago, and nothing had changed, and he was still at the house. Nothing ever changed, not until something actually happened, and at that point, it would be too late. But now, as he stood beneath the same mesquite tree by the coffee shop, shivering even with the heat, out of options, and not sure what the hell he was doing, he was wondering if he'd made the right choice. Reckless, they'd always told him. That's what he was. He made reckless decisions and got himself into more trouble, and one of these days he was going to dig himself into a hole he couldn't get out of. Keith wondered if that time was now. Maybe if he went to the police here, there would be someone who would listen to him, would see him as not just a foster kid and a number, but as a person. But he didn't know if he could take that risk. If he could just get something to eat, could just sleep and get some rest, maybe he'd be able to think better. And that all started with this dumpster. Keith slowly made his way out to it, and his steps froze as he drew closer to the enclosure. The lock was engaged. His legs trembled beneath him, and his eyes stung. What did he do? He took staggering steps forward, hands reaching up to pull the lock just in case. Maybe it was locked. Keith slumped down next to the dumpster, knowing he needed to leave before someone else saw him, but he leaned his head back against the hot metal, staring blankly at the wooden fence across from him. A wooden fence in which a table tray had been set up. He blinked. The table tray remained, and on it, there was a bottle of water and a plate. Keith shakily stood up. This couldn't be for him, could it? The water bottle was warm, sitting in a small bowl of what had likely been ice, but the sun had taken care of it. And the plate had a lid over it that Keith lifted up. A bagel, banana, apple, and a folded piece of paper sat upon it. Keith reached out a trembling hand for the paper. "Hello," the note read in elegant cursive. "If you are reading this, please help yourself to the snacks on the table, which I do hope are more to your taste than the garbage." Keith flushed at the reminder. "If you feel comfortable, I'd like to invite you into the into the shop so I can offer you a proper meal too. And if you do not, please know that I will continue to put out some snacks as long as you need them, and the invitation is always open. Take care, young man. Karan, owner of the Orange Grind." Keith brought the note to his chest, holding it there, and crumpling the paper. The man he'd run into wasn't angry. He wanted Keith to come into his nice coffee shop so he could feed him. Someone wanted to be nice to him. It could be a trap. He could call the police, have Keith charged with theft or trespassing, and it would just be another mark against his already giant record. But maybe someone actually was just being genuinely kind. For the moment, Keith gathered up the food and water, shoving the note into his jacket pocket, and retreated back underneath the cover of the tree to eat, going back to his original plan of having food in him would help him think. The bagel was plain, but no less delicious, for it soft and doughy in his hands, and the banana firm and sweet. The apple he had opted to hold on to, just in case. He also kept the now empty water bottle, as he could fill it on his way. He could fill it this way at the water fountains and have it on hand rather than having to constantly return to the 2 parks he'd found that had water. And now that he'd eaten, what should he do? Go inside? Leave? Keith shifted on his feet, biting his lip. Leave, he decided. Leaving would be safer, and tomorrow he figured out when it came. There was another plate of food when Keith returned the next day, a little after 4:30 in the afternoon, if the clock on the bank he'd passed was accurate. He debated coming by earlier, but he didn't know what time the man, Karan, and that was a different name, was putting the food out, and he didn't want to run into him. And for the first time in days, he'd actually slept through most of the night, high up in a tree and invisible to passerby below. And while he slept in said tree before, last night had been different, because not only did he have food in his stomach, he had the note pressed to his heart, and it served better than any blanket or pillow could have. A reminder that someone out there, without knowing him at all, cared. That someone had finally seen him when everyone else in this town had given him a wide berth, suspicious looks, and that a single one had approached to ask what he, clearly a young teenager, was doing out here, whether in concern or to report him from truancy or vagrancy. If it wasn't for the dirty looks, Keith would have almost thought he was invisible, but not to Karan. And this time the man had left him a muffin, blueberry, another apple and banana, and alongside the water bottle there was a bottle of apple juice. And another note. "I'm glad to see you found the food," the note read in the same cursive. "I hope it was to your liking. Blueberry muffins are my niece's favorite, and I hope you enjoy it too. Karan." There was no pressure to come into the shop, no threat, and true to his word, the man had left the food out again. Keith took the food and retreated to the tree once more. He'd eaten the apple earlier for breakfast, and like last time, he saved this apple, and this time the banana too, but he ate the muffin, and it practically melted in his mouth, and drank the apple juice and part of the water. And after he'd finished, he had a decision to make. Go inside, meet Karan, and possibly have to escape and fight his way out if he tried to call the police, or go back to the park where he was alone and no one could hurt him. But he couldn't live at the park. There was no future for him at the park. But he didn't want pity either. He knew his situation was pathetic, but his ears reddened. He didn't want pity. That said something had to change, or he would just become a statistic, and no one would even know who he was when they found his body, and no one would miss him. He had to take this chance with the one person who so far had been nothing but kind, and he wasn't being reckless. He thought it out, and hopefully, he felt like an intruder as he approached the front door, and that feeling only grew as he pushed open the door, and a bell tinkled above him as he entered into the very cozy, if air-conditioned, and Keith had almost forgotten what that felt like, and he shivered, shop, with little tables and armchairs and bookshelves and knickknacks, all set in a scheme of blue, brown, and orange, clean and tidy, where Keith was grungy and stuck out like a sore thumb. There was an older woman sitting at one of the tables reading a book, and a group of what looked like college students clustered at one of the 2 larger tables in the far corner, with books spread out, but otherwise the shop was empty of patrons and seemingly empty of employees, and Keith realized with a start the shop was going to be closing soon, and the owner had likely already gone home, which meant there was no reason for him to be here. He went to step backwards, to leave before anyone took notice of him, but a swinging door behind the counter that had no doubt led to a kitchen opened, and the orange-mustached man emerged, his eyes locking on Keith's from across the room, and Keith froze, caught. But the man who had to be Corinne smiled, his mustache even seeming to curl up at the action, and inclined his head at Keith, saying nothing, and clearly waiting for Keith to decide what to do. He took a hesitant step forward, and the man smiled widened. "Good afternoon, young man," he said, voice lightly accented. As Keith paused just a few feet from the counter, hyper-aware of the fact that if he needed to, he can turn and run, and there was no way this man could stop him. "What can I get for you today?" Keith's voice with a rasp. And when was the last time he'd actually spoken aloud? And he felt his cheeks heat at the sound, at the fact he didn't know what to say now that he was here. Thank you. He didn't have any money. He got Corinne's notes. "Do you like coffee?" Corinne interrupted his thoughts, not losing a smile. Keith gave a small shake of his head. "What about hot chocolate?" Keith hadn't had hot chocolate since Pop had died, but he remembered making it all the time at the fire station, of their little tea kettle, whistling and filling mugs and topping it off with whipped cream and candy canes, and Keith was alarmed. His eyes were stinging again. "Hot chocolate it is," Corinne answered for him. "Take a seat anywhere you'd like, and I'll whip that right up." His eyes, this close, in a unique blend of purple and blue that almost seemed to shimmer, sparkled. "My treat." Taking away any questions Keith had that Corinne knew he was the boy from the dumpster. Keith cleared his throat. "Thank you." "You're most welcome, lad." And unlike most names he'd been called, this one didn't sound condescending. It only sounded kind. Keith turned away before the stinging in his eyes showed itself, walking to the nearest two-person table with a clear line to the door, and gingerly sat down. And one hand whirring in his jacket cuff and the other in his pocket where the two notes rested, Keith waited for far more than his drink. So that was chapter 2. I hope you enjoy. Sorry if I stuttered. Yeah.